It is said that when the moon leans low over Thebes, the desert begins to breathe. The sands shift like murmuring water, and from that ocean of silence, a single shadow rises. Tall, narrow, unbroken. The obelisk. For those who wander beneath the Egyptian stars, it seems less a monument than a question. A sliver of stone pointing not toward heaven, but into memory. Its sides shimmer faintly under moonlight, covered in hieroglyphs that no one alive truly understands. Each carved line seems to pulse with something unsaid, as though the rock itself holds a language older than breath. Scholars say the obelisks were built as frozen rays of the sun, anchors of Ra's light upon the earth. But the night tells a different story. In the hush of the hours before dawn, when the winds from the Nile grow still, those who have stood near the great stone have spoken of a faint hum, almost imperceptible, not sound but vibration. A whisper through granite. It begins deep within the base, rising slowly like a heartbeat that never stops. No one can record it, for it is not heard through the ears but felt through the bones. A low, resonant memory. Perhaps the hum is only the wind. Perhaps it is something older, still awake beneath the sand. Long before Thebes was a ruin, before its temples fell silent, this land was filled with the belief that stone could hold eternity. The artisans who carved these sacred monoliths did not think of them as dead matter. To them, stone was living. It could listen, remember, even speak in its own patient way. Every chisel stroke was an offering, every mark a prayer. And so, when they shaped the obelisk and raised it toward the heavens, they were not merely building. They were giving the sun a voice that would outlast them all. Now, centuries later, the city that once rang with hymns lies in fragments. The priests are dust. The river still flows, but its banks have forgotten their songs. Yet the obelisk remains, and in the silence that surrounds it, some say the stone still speaks. Not in words, but in resonance, a language of vibration and memory. Travelers who pass through Thebes at night have described strange moments when time seems to blur. The desert hums faintly beneath their feet. The air trembles, and for a breath, the hieroglyphs appear to shimmer, as though light were moving from within. They report feeling a warmth in the air, the subtle sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by history itself. It is easy to dismiss such things, easy to call them tricks of the wind, or fatigue from the long desert journey. Yet those who have listened closely to the obelisk's whisper often leave changed. They describe a stillness that stays with them, as if something in the stone had recognized them, and in return, they had recognized the stone. Ancient texts, what remains of them, speak of the voice of Ra, a sacred hum said to connect earth and sun. Some fragments suggest that the priests of Thebes used this tone in their morning rituals. At dawn, they would stand before the obelisk and chant softly in a single note, letting their voices merge with the hum of the stone. Together, they would awaken the city, calling the light back into being. Perhaps this was their way of reminding the world that even the sun must be summoned. That light, like faith, needs to be invited each morning. Now, as the desert reclaims what time has left behind, that chant has fallen silent. But the hum, that subtle vibration, remains, waiting beneath the surface. Some believe it is the echo of those dawn ceremonies, trapped within the granite. Others think it is the earth itself responding, remembering the rhythm of devotion. If one were to place a hand upon the stone, as the moon stands high and the wind stills, they might feel it, that trembling beneath the palm. It feels alive, not strong, but certain, like the quiet pulse of something that refuses to end. There are those who say that deep beneath the sands, below the visible base of the obelisk, lies a chamber. A hollow chamber, filled not with relics, but with air, the breath of the builders, sealed inside as a final offering. The hum, they say, is the echo of that breath. 1,000 years of silence exhaling softly into the night. Whether that chamber truly exists or not, the idea alone carries a quiet beauty. The thought that a civilization once believed silence itself could be sacred, and that breath could be preserved as eternity. Sometimes, the desert wind carries fine particles of gold dust, remnants of temple paint, crushed long ago. Under the moonlight, they drift around the obelisk, catching light as they fall. It is said that when the air glimmers like that, one can almost see the past. The priests in white linen, torches flickering, voices rising with the dawn. The obelisk shines, alive once more, its tip catching the first rays of a sun that never truly died. The night returns. The wind settles. The hum continues. Those who study sound and stone have long noted the peculiar resonance of obelisks. The granite, quarried from Aswan and polished to perfection, carries acoustic properties that amplify even the subtlest vibration. It is possible that what people hear is the sound of the earth itself, seismic murmurs rising through the bedrock. But even scientists admit there is something uncanny about it, something deliberate. Why shape a monument in such a way that it sings with the wind? Why carve words meant to be read by the sun? Why build a voice that would outlast all others? Perhaps the ancients believed that the universe itself was music, that everything living and still vibrates in harmony. To them, silence was not emptiness, but the pause between notes. When the last temple bells fell quiet, the song of the obelisk remained. It has never stopped. Even now, as the modern city hums beyond the horizon, the obelisk stands alone, its shadow stretching long over the sand. It watches, patient as time itself, as stars drift across the firmament it once measured. Each night, the same dance repeats. Moonrise, silence, hum. Beneath it, the earth exhales. And perhaps somewhere, deep within that unbroken pillar, the memory of light still turns slowly. A secret, sacred, eternal rhythm. It is said that if you stay long enough, through the coldest part of the night, when even the jackals sleep, you may hear it more clearly. The hum changes, becomes softer, warmer, almost like a voice forming words just beyond reach. Not in any known tongue, but in something older, a pulse of meaning that cannot be translated. It does not tell a story. It does not explain. It simply is. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden within the stone, that not all voices were meant to be understood. Some were meant only to remind us that the world itself is alive, that even in stillness there is movement, and in silence, song. As dawn approaches, the first light brushes the tip of the obelisk, turning its edge to gold. The hum grows fainter, folding back into the stone like a dream retreating before morning. The desert warms. The sound fades. For a moment, there is only stillness. The sands gleam like water. The city of Thebes, long gone, seems to shimmer beneath the surface of memory. Its columns, its gates, its countless offerings, all of it breathing quietly beneath the dust. The obelisk stands alone, yet not alone. Around it, the wind begins again, carrying whispers that no one can quite hear. Whispers of builders and kings, of prayers once carved into living rock, of a people who believed that death was not an ending but a form of continuation. And as the day begins, the obelisk forgets nothing. It stands as it has always stood, a bridge between worlds, a single stone holding the breath of a civilization. The whisper that once hummed through it retreats into silence, but silence, too, has memory. And in that memory, the hum remains, unseen, unmeasured, infinite. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was only meant to remind us that even when all voices fade, the earth still remembers how to sing. It is said that in the highlands where Anatolia folds into itself like a sleeping animal, there stands a gate that faces no sunrise. It greets no season, receives no procession, and yet it waits year after year under the same patient moon. The stones rise in soft tears, their edges worn like old prayers, and beyond them, a single portal opens into night. The air is thin there. Breath leaves the mouth in a small pale cloud and drifts toward the dark like a moth to a lantern. Beneath the silence, a wind moves through grasses that remember snow, and above, an oceanic sky full of star-marked depths. They say shepherds used to rest at this gate, laying their heads on rolled cloaks, watching the constellations graze and change. They did not give the place a name, for a name would have anchored it too tightly to one age. Instead, they listened. Some nights, the stone seemed to answer the sky, not with sound but with a slow alignment, as if the gate were a key turning toward some celestial lock. The old ones would say, "A temple, yes, but not to any god with a face. A temple to the path the stars once took across the roof of the world." Whispers tell us that in forgotten centuries, pilgrims came with offerings of salt and milk, placing them on a low altar as if feeding a creature made of night. They traced carved spirals with their fingertips, each curve a memory, each notch a season folding into the next. The carvings were not words, yet they spoke. Animals with wings and eyes of flame, serpents looping around circles, suns that were not suns at all but doors. The gate watched and the sky watched back. Travelers from distant valleys spoke of other hilltop sanctuaries. Circles of pillars set in the earth like teeth, foxes and cranes and bulls etched in shallow relief. Far to the south, a mound was lifted, then lowered, and within it rose stones that seemed older than dust itself. They called that place a belly button of the earth, a navel where creation tightened its knot. To name it is to enter a debate. To simply feel it is to enter a dream. In those circles, and in this gate, there is a kinship of intention. Stone raised not to walls, but to wonder. The first steps into the temple are not steps at all, but pauses. One stands, one listens, one lets the moonlight gather on the skin like dew. The threshold is simple, 2 uprights and a lintel, but the space beyond feels larger than the hill could hold. There is a stillness that does not come from emptiness. It comes from attention, as if the place itself is looking outward, watching the heavens for a sign it already knows by heart. It is said the builders aligned this gate not to the dawn we now greet, but to a different sky, a sky shifted by the slow breath of time. The elders of many lands knew this turning, the long cycle where the pole wanders and the seasons slip, where the great river of stars drifts in a circle too vast for a single lifetime. Some called it precession. Others, more softly, called it the slow forgetting of the heavens. The temple remembers what we have let go. The map that the old constellations once traced, the beasts that once prowled the northern dark, the way a season used to taste before it wore a different mask. By the inner wall, a stone slab rests no higher than a knee. The altar, it is unadorned, save for a single groove where liquid once flowed, milk, water, perhaps, or a libation of honey to sweeten the night. When the wind slips over the gate, it finds the groove and hums. Not a whistle, not a tone, but the suggestion of breath. As if the stone itself exhaled a little each time a cloud passed before the moon. Beyond the altar, the floor dips gently, a shallow basin where rain gathers in winter and evaporates through summer. Around the basin, small marks dot the stone like constellations set underfoot. Whether they are natural or cut by hands is a question left by the centuries. But stand long enough in the silver hours, and one can almost see a pattern. A mirror of the sky above, a star map cast at the level of the ankles, so that the pilgrim crosses the heavens with every quiet step. No one knows when the gates were first raised. Some say in days when the cranes flew lower and the river ran wider, when the nights bore more stars. Others place it later, in an age of kings and storm gods, when scribes wrote on clay and sealed it with lions. The truth has folded itself in layers of dust. And perhaps this is right. A place that points to the eternal should not be pinned to a single name, a single year. It is enough to say, it was old even when the last winter ended. It was tender even when the first empire began. It was sacred to those who had no need to say sacred. At the threshold, a carving. A pair of wings joined at the tips, arcing into a circle. Some see a vulture, guardian of the dead. Some see the sky itself folding into a closed eye. Others see hands cupped in offering. The wings hold a small at their center, a seed, a star, a breath captured in stone. Those who pass beneath it do so quietly, as if entering a chamber where a child sleeps. The temple's outer stones keep company with lichens and low grasses. They are crumbled but not broken, veiled but not lost. On certain nights, when the moon is thin and the air is clean, the gate frames a region of the sky where no famous constellation lives now. The figures once there have drifted into new stories, their bright elders retired into the edges of the map. Yet the gate still knows them. It lifts the eye toward a memory. Hunters that were not men, a river that was not the Milky Way, a spiral of time we no longer name. The listener feels the absence like the hollow after a bell stops ringing. Not empty, but resonant. Some believe the builders marked the edges of their year not with the rising sun, but with the rising dark, the first star to appear in a certain notch, the last to fade from a certain corner. They would gather as the light withdrew, and when the first star opened its eye, a chant would begin low and steady, a hum that matched the turning of the heavens. No instruments, no drums, only breath. The sound would pass through the gate and into the valley, dissolving into the oceanic silence until only the sky was singing back. We do not know their words. The wind has eaten them, the rain has tasted them, and time has carried them down to the roots of the grasses. But the rhythm remains. If one closes the eyes and stands within the portal, the world simplifies. The heartbeat slows, the mind lets go of its torch, and the night becomes a soft chamber. The stars do not shout. They do not lecture. They arrive and depart with the patience of stone. Along the inner lintel, faint marks like tally lines drift toward a curve. The curve meets a spiral, and the spiral ends where a small square has been cut away. In this square, a piece of the sky drops each winter. A bright visitor that rests there, held for a breath, then continues its path. Some say the square was built for a single star, to welcome it like a guest into the house of night. Others say it was to teach children how the heavens move, the way elders teach the young to follow tracks in snow. Watch, the old ones may have whispered. Marked by the moon, the star goes there and there and there. Remember, child, the sky is a book that turns slowly. It is tempting to call these people astronomers, but the word is too narrow, too sharp. They were listeners. They listened to stone and breath, to frost and tide, to the faint echo of a thing beyond naming. They did not separate the sacred from the study. To watch the sky was to pray. To touch the cold lintel was to learn. There are stories of a winter when the stars arrived late. The elders gathered at the gate, hands folded into their sleeves, and waited. Clouds held the hills for days. When at last the roof of the world opened, the familiar figure was not where it should be. A little to the left, a little lower in the mouth of the portal. Some wept, not from fear but from awe. The sky had shifted in ways only stone could predict. The world was alive enough to move, and the temple had told them so. From that season onward, they spoke of the long drift, the slow wheel that carries ages like seeds in its palm. Beneath the silence of these stones lies another layer. Footsteps. Some small, some wide apart, all of them turned toward the same threshold. There is an imprint near the altar where a knee once rested. There is a shallow, polished line on the doorpost, where hands smooth roughness over lifetimes. There is a sunken circle outside the gate, barely visible, where people may have moved in slow procession around an unseen center. Not a dance, not quite. More like the turning of a great night watch, guardians pacing the edge of a dream. On nights when the wind lies down and frost glitters in the grass like spilled salt, the gate offers a secret. The darkness beyond the lintel is not flat. It appears to deepen, as if the stars, framed by stone, sink a little closer, revealing faint brothers beside them. Stars that the day world never notices. For a brief hush, the visitor sees not patterns but presence. Light upon deeper light, a veil drawn back. The feeling is not excitement. It is consecration. One breathes more softly, and the night breathes back. Some fragments of clay found in distant lands speak of winged creatures and storm kings, of mountains crowned with temples where petitioners brought oil and grain. In the margins, little circles follow one another like beads. Whether they count moons or lambs, no one knows. But the circles echo the marks on the gate's floor, and echoes have a way of knowing each other across country and time. Perhaps the hilltop places once formed a chain, a string of listening posts along the spine of the earth, sending their breath into the heavens and receiving the heavens' answer in dew and drift and dream. As for the gate itself, it asks nothing. It only frames. Those who come to it bring their questions quietly like bowls. Some ask for the return of a lost face. Some ask that the cold ease its hand on the fields. Some ask for sleep untroubled by the stones of the past. The gate does not reply in words. It offers a path for the eye, a line through which the night pours like water through a narrow channel. If the visitor stays, the mind grows still. Thoughts loosen, falling like leaves. The stars begin their slow procession across the opening, and time walks through the body on bare feet. Toward morning, a pallor gathers in the east. The figures on the stones lose their edges, becoming ghosts of themselves. The wings above the threshold thin to simple arcs. The altar's groove holds a last dark thread of night. In that tender hour, when the birds begin to consider their first notes, the sky within the gate turns transparent. Not empty, but clear, like water that reveals the riverbed for an instant before light bends it away. The hidden constellations recede into the long memory that keeps them. The oceanic dark pulls its veil up over the hills. The visitor steps back. The portal is merely a shape now, stone embracing sky, nothing more and nothing less. The cold lifts. Breath loses its white cloak. The grasses whisper of day. A shepherd calls to his flock below. The sound rises, soft and domestic, and touches the lintel as lightly as a hand in blessing. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the gate was always for the stars. A kindness offered to the heavens, a place to rest their light while the earth turned beneath. Or perhaps it is for us, for the part that remembers how to listen without asking, how to watch without possessing, how to stand within a frame and feel the universe move through it like wine through reeds. Beneath the silence, a small echo lingers, not of music, but of measure. The memory of a night when the square in the lintel caught a bright wanderer for a single breath. The memory of footsteps in frost. The memory of those who raised stone to meet sky and called it good. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The gate waits, patient, star-marked, veiled by weather and time. When the moon leans down again and the grasses still their talk, it will open once more. Not to a corridor, not to a chamber, but to an older sky we carry within us. A buried map, a slow spiral of recognition. And in that moment, framed by stone and breath and dusk, the listener will feel what the builders felt. That the night is not emptiness but presence. That the stars are not distant but near. That the earth itself is a temple turning gently under a roof of sacred light. The day arrives. The hills exhale a faint mist. The gate closes nothing, keeps nothing. It simply stands, a faithful outline against the changing sky. It has forgotten none of its secrets. It has given them all away to the wind. Where memory fades, it remains. Marked by the moon, it remembers the paths of vanished constellations and the hands that once fed it milk. And as the valley wakes and the voices of day draw near, the portal becomes again what all sacred things are in the morning. A quiet shape, a soft threshold, a promise folded into stone. The hidden stars return to their ocean. The gate holds them even in absence. And the listener, walking down through the grasses toward the living world, carries a stillness that does not break. A slow, celestial hush, like a candle cupped against the wind, like the night's last blessing resting on the tongue. It begins not with water, but with silence. A long, shimmering hush stretched across the plain, where reeds sway like slow dancers and the air smells faintly of clay. There, beneath the dust and the drifting starlight, lies the ghost of a river. Once, it wound like a silver thread through a city of mirrors, a place where the moon bowed twice each night, once to the heavens and once to its reflection below. The people of that vanished city called the river sacred. They said it carried not water, but memory, that each drop which touched its current was remembered forever, as though the river itself kept a diary of light. Now, there is only a dried course, a soft trench where shadows gather at dusk. Children from nearby villages walk across it without knowing its name. They find shards of black stone polished smooth as glass, remnants of something that once shimmered, perhaps a wall, perhaps a window to another age. It is said that when the wind moves gently across this hollow, it sounds like distant water, a low, murmuring sigh, the earth remembering what it once was. Long ago, the river's banks were marked with circles of stone. Each circle surrounded a tall obsidian mirror set in the ground, angled toward the sky. Priests came at dusk to kneel before them, whispering the names of ancestors, their reflections shimmering like living spirits in the glass. They believed the river was a passage not between lands but between times. To look into its waters was to see the faces of those who came before, and those yet to come. Archaeologists who have walked this place speak of odd light. At certain hours, when the sun bleeds low and the dust turns to gold, strange flickers appear. Faint, rippling flashes that move as though water were still there. Instruments detect nothing, but those who stand quietly feel something. A chill that moves upward from the ground, like the ghost of a current brushing against the skin. Some call it illusion, others call it remembrance. It is said that the city beside the river was known for its silence. Its people believed that sound, once made, could wound the air, that too much noise frightened the spirits living in the reflection. So they spoke softly even when rejoicing. They played instruments not with wood or string, but with light, thin sheets of polished metal that caught the sunset and reflected it in trembling patterns across the water. When wind passed through the hollow reeds, it made a tone so low, so patient, that the whole valley seemed to hum with one breath. Every evening, when twilight folded over the roofs, the priests performed what they called the ritual of returning. They would light small bowls of oil along the banks, forming lines of fire that stretched for miles. The flames mirrored themselves in the surface of the river until the water looked like a road of stars. And then, they would whisper the river's true name, a sound said to be so soft that even the air barely carried it. No one remembers that name now. Some say it began with the sound of an exhale, something like ha or ahm, and ended in a silence you could feel but never repeat. Others say the name was not a word, but a pattern of breaths, inhaled once, never spoken again. When the great drought came, the people believed the river was not angry, only tired. They prayed to it, offering silver bowls of water from distant wells. But the current slowed. Then it stopped. And one morning, they awoke to find the mirrors along the bank blackened, as if the night had fallen inside them and refused to leave. Without its reflection, the city began to fade. Walls crumbled, gardens dried. It is said that even the voices of the people grew fainter, as if the river had taken their names along with its own. Centuries later, when wanderers first stumbled upon the ruins, they found the obsidian mirrors half buried in sand. They lifted them carefully and saw their own faces, distorted, elongated, shimmering like candlelight beneath water. The air around them seemed to hum faintly, and though there was no wind, the reeds swayed as if something unseen passed through. One explorer wrote in his journal, "I have never seen water, yet I am surrounded by its ghost. The earth here listens. The stones remember. When I stand still, I feel the weight of eyes, not above, but below." In local lore, the dried riverbed became a place of pilgrimage. Travelers came not to drink, but to dream. They would lie upon the cracked clay at dusk, pressing an ear to the earth. Some claimed they could hear it, the faint sound of a current still flowing far beneath, like a whispering vein of the underworld. Others said that at the hour before dawn, when the stars lean close, you can see reflections in the dust. Faces flickering for a moment, then fading as the light returns. The elders who live nearby still refuse to speak the river's name. When asked, they smile and touch their lips with a single finger, as if the silence itself were sacred. They tell a story of a woman, the last keeper of the water, who walked into the dry bed at twilight carrying a single bowl of clear liquid. She poured it into the dust, whispering a name the world had forgotten. The wind rose, the air shimmered, and for one instant, the river glowed with light, a long silver serpent winding through the valley. Then it was gone, and the woman was gone too. Only her footprints remained, pressed deep into the clay. When the rains finally came, they filled those footprints first. It is tempting to see the tale as myth. Yet scientists who have studied the ground note an unusual mineral signature, a layer of polished silica that should not exist naturally in such quantity. They say the valley must once have held an extraordinary concentration of reflective stone. But even they admit the pattern of the deposits, the way they seem arranged, almost deliberate, is unlike anything known. Perhaps the people of that vanished city learned something we have since forgotten. That reflection is not just image, but presence. That to see oneself mirrored is to enter into a kind of conversation. A dialogue between matter and spirit, water and memory. The ancient texts of the nearby civilizations mention a river of clarity, a stream where each soul met its twin. Some scholars think it refers to this very place. They argue the river may have served as both temple and teacher, showing pilgrims not what they were, but what they could become. Each reflection not a likeness, but a prophecy. The priests who tended its banks left carvings behind, not of gods or kings, but of eyes. Hundreds of them, open and unblinking, staring outward from the stones. They seem almost alive under moonlight, glinting faintly as if wet. No one knows if they watched the people or the river or the silence between them. As night settles, one can almost imagine the city alive again. Torches glowing, reflections dancing on the walls, laughter softened by distance. Then the vision fades, leaving only the shape of absence, the scent of dust and time. The stars return to their patient vigil, reflected in nothing now but the eyes of those who remember. It is said that every river has two ends, one where it meets the sea, and one where it meets forgetfulness. Perhaps this river found the latter. Perhaps, tired of carrying the memories of humankind, it sought to return to its own source, that hidden spring beneath creation where all names are first spoken, and where even gods must go to listen. Tonight, the wind moves softly over the hollow. The dust stirs like fine mist, and somewhere within the silence, a tone emerges, faint, like a note plucked on an invisible string. It lasts for only a breath. Then it fades, leaving behind the smallest echo, the kind that lingers inside the bones. Those who hear it describe a feeling afterward. Not sadness, not wonder, but recognition. As if they, too, have forgotten something once vital, something once luminous, and the echo is a reminder that it still exists, somewhere beneath the surface of time. At dawn, the valley looks ordinary again. Cracked earth, broken reeds, scattered stones. But in the first light, the air shimmers faintly, and for an instant the ground seems to ripple. Not with dust, but with water. The illusion vanishes before you can name it. And so the legend endures, of a river that refused to die, that slipped quietly beneath the threshold of memory, carrying with it the reflections of all who ever gazed upon it. This name is lost, but not gone. It drifts somewhere between silence and dream, waiting for the world to remember how to speak softly again. Perhaps, when that happens, the water will return. Not to the earth, but to the hearts of those who still listen. In the high altitudes of the Andean plains, where the air thins to a silver hush and every breath feels like a prayer, there lies a lake that holds the sky. Its waters are colder than memory, still as glass, older than language. The locals call it Titicaca, the stone puma. They say that beneath its mirrored surface sleep the relics of forgotten gods, fragments of gold, bone, and breath. Among them, somewhere near the lake's deepest heart, rests a mask without eyes, without a mouth, only the faint impression of a face, like the last echo of a sigh. It was found once, long ago, when the sun burned too fiercely and the water receded for a single season. Fishermen from a nearby village discovered it half buried in the silt, glinting dully as if the moon had taken refuge in the mud. They lifted it with trembling hands, and even through the layer of dirt and salt, they felt something beneath the metal, a vibration, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat caught in gold. The mask was taken to the temple on the hill, a place of stones stacked with care, where wind and whisper passed freely through the corridors. There, it was washed, anointed, and placed before the altar of the silent god. It is said the god's true name had been forgotten even before the mask was made. The people called him the listener. He was not worshipped with song or sacrifice, but with quiet, long hours of unmoving stillness, bodies folded in shadow, breaths measured against the turning of the sky. The mask was their offering, a face for a god who had none. It bore no eyes, for the god saw through everything. No mouth, for he spoke through nothing. Only the faintest indentation for the breath, the memory of a voice that had once filled the mountains. When the mask was placed upon the altar, a stillness settled over the valley. The llamas in the fields ceased their restless sounds. The wind stopped whispering through the reeds. Even the lake seemed to draw one deep breath and hold it. For 3 days, the priests kept vigil in that silence, waiting for a sign. On the 4th night, as the moon rose white over the water, a low hum filled the air, so faint that they felt it more than heard it. The walls trembled softly. The mask glowed with a dull light, as though remembering the face it once covered. No one dared to touch it. They simply knelt, heads bowed, listening to the sound that came from nowhere. And when it faded, the oldest among them said, "The god is breathing again." From that night onward, the mask became an oracle of silence. When questions weighed too heavily, the priests would bring them not to the mask for answers, but for stillness. They would place the written question upon the altar, and in the quiet that followed, they would wait. If the candle beside it flickered, it meant the silence had heard. No words were given in reply, only understanding. Some say the mask was not made by human hands, that it rose from the lake itself, formed by pressure, time, and something unearthly. But fragments found nearby suggest otherwise. Tools of goldsmiths, traces of fire, bits of woven linen. And yet, the workmanship defies comprehension. Even under magnification, the surface bears no marks of hammer or chisel. It seems to have been shaped by warmth alone, as though someone had pressed their face into molten light and breathed once before it cooled. There is a story, told quietly by the descendants of that valley, of a craftsman who wished to capture eternity. He believed that sound was fleeting but silence could be shaped, that if one could mold stillness, one could preserve divinity. For years he labored beside the lake, melting gold, casting and recasting, until he made a mask smooth as a drop of dawn. When it was finished, he placed it upon his own face and breathed into it, sealing himself into silence forever. The next morning, the mask was found alone, and the craftsman's workshop was empty, save for the faint scent of smoke and salt. Whether myth or memory, the valley still carries the hush of that act. Travelers who pass the lake at night claim they can feel it. A pressure in the chest, a soft ringing in the ears, like the air itself is holding its breath. Some wake from dreams of being underwater, unable to speak, yet filled with a strange peace. The mask remains in a museum now, far from the lake, displayed beneath glass that gleams under sterile light. Tourists drift past it, whispering about its beauty, its mystery. But photographs cannot capture what those who stood before it once felt. That quiet hum, that almost living stillness. It is not something seen. It is something shared. Every year, on the anniversary of its discovery, curators note an odd phenomenon. The glass fogs faintly from within. Temperature controls remain stable, yet the mask seems to exhale, once softly, as if remembering what breath feels like. No alarm is raised. The fog clears, the gold gleams again, and silence resumes its patient watch. Scholars debate its purpose endlessly. Some say it was funerary, meant for the burial of a high priest. Others believe it was ceremonial, worn in rites to connect with unseen realms. But a few, the quietest among them, suggest something else entirely, that the mask was not for the dead, nor for the gods, but for silence itself. A vessel through which stillness could look back at the living. The ancient records of the Andean highlands mention a breathless ritual, where initiates would descend into caves and remain there for days without speaking. When they emerged, they wore faint golden dust on their skin and said nothing of what they had seen. Their eyes held the stillness of stars reflected in deep water. Perhaps this was their right. Perhaps the mask was their teacher. It is said that in those caves, sound behaved differently. It folded back on itself, echoing inward instead of outward. A single whisper could linger for hours, turning softer each time, until it became indistinguishable from breath. There, silence was not absence but density, the place where the world's sound went to rest. The initiates called it the womb of light. To enter it was to remember the first moment before creation, when everything was still, and the universe waited for its first word. And so, when the craftsman made his golden mask without eyes or mouth, perhaps he was not capturing a face at all. Perhaps he was shaping the memory of that moment, the silence before everything began. Those who visit the lake today sometimes find the air unnaturally calm. Birds fall quiet as they approach. Voices seem to drift into the water rather than across it. And if one kneels by the shore at twilight and looks carefully, they may see their own reflection blur, features dissolving into gold and shadow, until the water stares back with no face at all. It is said that the mask still lies in two places, one of gold in the museum, and one of reflection beneath the lake. The one of gold belongs to the world of sight. The one of reflection belongs to the world of silence. They are halves of the same truth, that what we do not say often speaks the loudest. When night settles fully, and the lake becomes a mirror of stars, one might feel the faintest vibration through the ground, like the slow breath of a mountain asleep. It is the same rhythm that once filled the temple, the same pulse that moved through the craftsman's hands. A sound beyond sound, the heartbeat of stillness. And if you listen long enough, until your own breath softens and your thoughts begin to dissolve, you might understand what the priests once knew. That silence is not emptiness. It is communion. It is the language of what endures. By dawn, mist curls from the lake like incense, and the world wakes gently. The mountains reflect in the water, their faces calm, unreadable. Somewhere beneath that mirrored surface, gold sleeps, and within it, a memory hums. It does not ask to be found. It only asks to be remembered. For silence, too, has a pulse. And in that pulse, eternity breathes. It stands alone in the thin air of the Andes, half buried in the mountain's bones. A single monolith that glows where no sun touches it. By day, it is cold and gray, indistinguishable from the cliffs around it. But when twilight falls and the last color bleeds from the sky, the stone begins to breathe. A faint radiance emerges from its surface. Not bright, not steady, but alive, as though light itself were remembering something through it. The locals call it Piedra del Alba, the Stone of Dawn. They say it was carved long before the First Empire, long before even the first word for stone. It is older than the temples that now crumble below, older than the songs that drift across the valley. No one knows who shaped it or why. It has no carvings, no altar, no doorway, only a surface polished so perfectly that it reflects the stars when night comes, yet seems to drink their light as well. Those who live near it tell quiet stories, of nights when the mountain itself glowed faintly, of shepherds who found their way home guided by its pulse, of travelers who woke in the dark to find their shadows outlined in silver though the moon was hidden. They say the stone holds the memory of the first sunrise, that when the world was still forming, it saw the birth of light, and in that instant learned how to keep it. Archaeologists call it impossible. They measure its luminescence, its mineral veins, its density, and find nothing unusual. But every instrument eventually fails to capture what human skin can feel. That subtle warmth, the sense of vibration under the fingertips, as if something inside were stirring. The old Quechua myths speak of stones that remember the sun's path. To them, mountains were not dead. They were archives. Every ray that touched their peaks was stored in their veins, kept safe until the next dawn. When the Inca spoke of huacas, sacred stones that bridged the living and divine, perhaps they meant this kind of memory, light held as devotion. At sunset, the wind slows around the monolith. The air grows thick, resonant. One can feel the change, the hush before a secret. As the stars begin to appear, the stone begins to glow, faintly at first, then more deeply, until it seems lit from within. It does not illuminate the ground around it. It simply glows for itself, inwardly, like a dream refusing to wake. Some believe the glow is not light but breath, the slow exhale of the earth after a long day. Others whisper that the monolith is hollow, filled with a crystal that feeds on starlight. Yet no chisel, no drill, no instrument has ever pierced it. When tapped, it answers with a tone, soft, harmonic, as though acknowledging the question but declining to answer. It is said that the first people who found it tried to move it. They tied ropes around it, set logs beneath it, and pulled until their hands bled. But the stone did not shift, not even a fraction. Instead, those who touched it too long began to dream of light, waves of gold and white and violet cascading through the dark, voices calling in languages they could not name. They awoke with tears on their faces and the taste of warmth in their mouths, like sunlight remembered through glass. After that, no one touched it again. The priests who later built their shrines in the valley would climb the path at solstice. At the hour before dawn, they would stand before the stone and wait. They brought no offerings, only silence. And when the first thin beam of the new sun broke over the horizon, it struck the stone directly. For one fleeting instant, the mountain blazed. Every surface reflected that light, scattering it like 1,000 mirrors. Then it faded, leaving the world still and pale. The priests would descend without a word. It was enough to have witnessed the light remembering itself. Generations later, when the empire fell and the temples turned to dust, the stone remained untouched. Storms buried it, earthquakes shook it, but it never cracked. Even now, in satellite images, it appears as a simple shadow among other shadows. But those who have stood before it swear they can feel its hum through their feet, a resonance that seems to match the heartbeat, slow and deep, as if the body recognizes something older than itself. There is a legend, quiet, half-forgotten, of a traveler who came to the mountain seeking to prove the stone's secret. He was a scholar of light, obsessed with its origins. He believed that within the glow lay the formula for eternity, a code written in radiance. He camped by the monolith for many nights, measuring, recording, waiting for the glow to reach its brightest. But the stone remained still. At last, in frustration, he pressed his palm against it and whispered, "Show me what you remember." They found his tent days later, empty. His notebooks lay open, filled with sketches of stars and strange spirals that matched no constellation. On the stone itself, faintly visible under moonlight, was the impression of a hand. Not carved, not burned, but pressed into the surface like warmth lingering on cold glass. The mark remains. No one knows what he saw. Some say the stone absorbed him, drew him into the memory of light itself. Others believe he finally understood that some knowledge is not meant to be kept, only witnessed. In the traditions of the Andean mystics, light was never merely illumination. It was being. To remember light was to remember origin, to recall the instant the world awakened and recognized itself. They taught that everything which exists carries a spark of that first dawn, hidden deep within. Mountains, rivers, breath, bone, all are made luminous by the memory of beginnings. And so, perhaps the stone does not glow at all. Perhaps it only awakens that memory within us, the same radiance we carry but forget to see. Standing before it, one feels smaller, yes, but also infinite, as if drawn into the same rhythm that moves through stars and veins alike. It is not a revelation. It is a return. When night deepens and the last trace of sunset fades, the stone's glow grows more distinct. The mountain around it vanishes into darkness, yet the monolith persists, pulsing gently, a heartbeat of light in the hollow of the world. If one stands in silence long enough, the senses begin to blur. The sound of wind becomes the same as the whisper of radiance. The heartbeat merges with the pulse of the stone. There is no boundary between seeing and being seen. Somewhere in that moment, one begins to understand why the ancients worshipped light not as power but as presence. It was never about what could be seen, but what could remain, the shimmer between being and memory. At dawn, when the first light touches the peaks again, the stone dims. Its glow withdraws, folding itself back into stillness. For a few minutes, the air smells faintly of rain and iron, like something newly made. Then the day begins as it always has, ordinary and bright, and the monolith becomes just stone again. The villagers who live nearby start their morning fires. The llamas graze, children laugh, and above them, the mountain exhales, ancient and unbothered. The glow is gone, but the feeling lingers. A warmth in the chest, a calm that has no name. Scientists, mystics, wanderers, all who visit leave with the same silence inside them, the same thought that refuses to be spoken. Perhaps light never disappears. It only changes its shape, waiting in stone, in memory, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. When night comes again, and the mountain sinks back into shadow, the monolith will breathe once more. Not for eyes to see, but for the dark to remember. For the dark, too, loves the light, and the stone, patient and eternal, keeps that love alive. It begins with the faint scent of parchment, dry, ancient, almost sweet, rising through cracks in the stone floor. The air beneath Alexandria still hums with the breath of 1,000 unread voices. Every century, someone claims to have found a hidden chamber there, untouched by flame. And though no proof endures, the rumor persists that deep below the ruins of the old city, beyond the catacombs and the echo of the harbor, there sleeps a library that refused to burn. They say its door is sealed not by locks, but by silence. A silence so dense it bends the air around it, keeping the dust undisturbed and the ink uniged. Those who claim to have heard of it speak of light like candle smoke, of corridors lined with crystalline tablets that shimmer when one passes. Words etched not in ink but in glass, shifting faintly, like reflections of stars on still water. Some call it myth, others memory. Yet even the skeptics admit the Library of Alexandria could not have vanished entirely. 100,000 scrolls, each a living thread of thought, cannot all turn to ash. Something remains. Something always remains. At night, when the Mediterranean exhales against the shore and the wind passes over the ruins, there comes a low rustle, a sound that is not quite the sea. It is softer, more deliberate, like the turning of fragile pages. The people who live near the harbor say it happens most often in the hour before dawn. Windows rattle faintly, candles flicker without breeze. And if you listen closely, you might hear a whisper. Faint, rhythmic, neither Greek nor Coptic nor Arabic, but older, like the voice of the paper itself remembering how to read. In the time of its glory, the library was said to contain every story the world had ever told. It was the dream of the Ptolemies, to gather the knowledge of all lands, to build a mirror in which the world could see its own reflection. Scribes copied every scroll that entered the harbor. Ships left lighter than they arrived, carrying only duplicates. The originals stayed, preserved under marble vaults, guarded by scholars who called themselves listeners of ink. They believed that knowledge was not to be owned but heard, that each word carried a tone, and together those tones formed the hum of creation. Reading was a ritual, not an act. Before unrolling a scroll, they would light oil lamps and whisper a small invocation. Let the dust remember, but dust forgets easily. Flame forgets nothing. When the library burned, whether by accident, by decree, or by time's slow cruelty, it was said the fire lasted for months. Boats passing at night saw the glow from miles away, and fishermen swore the sea turned gold from reflected flame. Yet in all that destruction, there were stories of survivors, scholars who fled through tunnels beneath the city, carrying scrolls wrapped in linen, vanishing into the catacombs like whispers into sleep. Perhaps those tunnels were more than escape routes. Perhaps they led to a second library, a chamber meant to outlast even the gods' forgetting. If such a place exists, it would not hold books as we know them. Words too long buried lose their sound, their ink, their meaning. But memory transforms. Some believe the scrolls turned to dust, but their essence lingered, imprinting itself upon the stone. Each wall became a page, each corridor a sentence still half-speaking. In that subterranean hush, even the faintest echo becomes sacred. Every drip of water, every footstep becomes an act of reading. It is said that those who find the entrance to the buried library never walk there by intention. It happens when one is lost, truly lost, in grief or longing or search. A stumble in the dark, a misplaced path, and suddenly the air changes. Dry, golden, thick with old breath. You feel watched, but kindly. The dust moves, gently, as if stirred by invisible fingers tracing forgotten lines. And then, faintly, the hum begins. At first it sounds like wind through reeds. Then, slowly, it resolves into rhythm, not words, but meaning. It is the sound of knowledge remembering itself. Some who claim to have heard it say it cannot be translated. It does not tell of history or kings or wars. It speaks of everything, the pulse of rivers, the curve of planets, the names of stars that have already died. It whispers the truth that language was only ever the shadow of thought. The real text lies in the silence between words. Perhaps that is why the library hid itself. Perhaps it grew weary of being read. Perhaps it chose to sleep. A scholar once wrote of a dream. I walked beneath the ruins of the city and saw shelves without end, each made of stone. Upon them, faint lights flickered, moving like living script. When I reached to touch one, the light vanished into my hand. And in that moment, I knew the book had read me. He awoke with dust under his nails and salt on his tongue. When he returned to the same place in waking life, the passage was gone. Legends tell that deep within that buried hall stands a single desk, smooth, black, untouched by time. On it rests a single book that no one has opened. Its cover bears no title, no mark. They say it writes itself, slowly, endlessly, recording every thought ever forgotten by humankind. Every sigh, every prayer, every name spoken only once. The ink is not black, but pale gold. It glows faintly under no light at all. And though no one reads from it, it continues to write. A book of silence, authored by memory. In the modern world, beneath the din of cities and the hum of machines, some claim to hear echoes of that lost library. Writers who wake from dreams with sentences already written. Composers who hear melodies that seem too ancient to be new. Perhaps they are not creating, but recalling fragments of that buried archive reaching upward through the strata of time, seeking the surface again. The dust above Alexandria is rich with such fragments. When storms roll in from the sea, grains of sand swirl through the streets, and if you watch closely in the light, you might see glimmers among them, tiny sparks as if from embers still alive. Some believe those are words, microscopic remnants of burnt scrolls still whispering as they drift. And when the wind settles, the city grows quiet, listening without knowing why. It is said that knowledge never dies. It only changes its form. Perhaps, then, the library is not beneath Alexandria at all. Perhaps it has scattered, carried by the wind and by the minds of those who dream. Perhaps every time we pause, every time a thought arrives unbidden, every time a silence feels full, that is the library breathing through us. If one were to stand upon the ruins at midnight, when the sea is calm and the stars lie mirrored in the black water, one might hear it, the faintest hum beneath the earth. Not loud enough to disturb sleep, only enough to deepen it. A heartbeat beneath the sand, slow and patient, as if the world were still turning a page somewhere below. The dust glows faintly then, silvered by moonlight, and for a moment it feels as though the city itself is reading, remembering what it once knew, forgiving what it lost. By dawn, the sound fades, the stones cool, the air returns to stillness. The harbor wakes with its ordinary noises, waves, footsteps, distant voices. But beneath it all, a softer tone lingers, a hum that will not leave, a memory too deep for destruction. Perhaps the fire never won. Perhaps it only carried the library into another form, one that could not burn, one that could only be found in the space between waking and dream. And perhaps, if you close your eyes tonight and listen carefully, you will hear it too. Not the turning of pages, not the echo of words, but the faint rhythm of knowledge sleeping beneath the dust, still whispering to the silence that birthed it. It is said that there was once a night when the sky held two moons, one pale and silver as it has always been, the other deep crimson, as though made from the breath of the earth itself. For 7 nights, they shone together above an empire whose name has long been swallowed by dust. Temples rose toward their twin light, and the people stood in awe beneath a sky divided between dream and omen. In the old city of Samarkand, among archives and worn parchments, there survives a single record, a page so faint that even under magnification the ink seems to tremble. It speaks of the era of the 2 eyes of heaven, a time when the gods looked down with doubled sight. Some believe it was a celestial illusion, a comet or reflection. Others whisper that it was not illusion at all, but remembrance, the brief return of a twin world that once shared our orbit, drawn close again by the memory of its own loss. No science confirms it, but the ruins that line the deserts of Central Asia bear witness to something strange. Walls engraved with twin crescents, perfectly symmetrical, facing each other like mirrored souls. No other motif repeats so persistently across that land. Always 2 moons, circling, embracing, devouring. At the heart of those ruins lies a broken observatory, its stones scattered, its arches collapsed. Yet within its center, a circular platform remains, polished smooth as a mirror. At night, it reflects the stars so perfectly that they appear suspended beneath the earth. The locals call it the Eye of Night. They say that when the 2nd moon appeared, this platform trembled, and the reflection of the heavens split in 2, one bright, one blood red, as though the universe were deciding which truth to keep. The story begins long before that, in an age when the world still spoke the language of alignment. The people of that kingdom believed the moon was not a rock, but a listener, a watcher of prayers, a witness to dreams. When it shone, they said, it was reflecting not the sun, but the longing of humankind. One evening, the moon did not rise alone. The sky glowed faintly red along the horizon, and a 2nd orb emerged, darker and heavier, as if drawn from the shadow of the first. The priests who tended the sky mirrors were the first to see it. They fell silent, for this was not foretold in their star charts. The world had been made for 1 moon only. For 7 days, the twin moons crossed the heavens together. 2 eyes of creation, one serene, one sorrowful. The nights grew bright beyond measure. Rivers shimmered silver red. The sands of the desert gleamed like copper dust. Even the shadows glowed faintly, unable to rest. The people called it the week of reflection. Poets wrote that the gods were speaking to each other across the sky, light and darkness in slow conversation. But in the temples, fear grew. 2 moons meant 2 truths, 2 times, 2 tides. The priests worried the balance of heaven was fracturing. Each night, the red moon grew fuller, while the silver moon waned. By the 5th night, their light overlapped, and the world below took on an eerie stillness, as though time itself were holding its breath. Animals would not feed. The air felt thick, as if weighted by unseen memory. And those who stared too long at the sky spoke of feeling watched from within. Old songs claim that the crimson moon was the echo of the first, the twin that had vanished eons before, swallowed by the dawn of creation. Banished for pride, it wandered the void until longing drew it home again. But 2 mirrors cannot coexist forever. One must reflect, the other must fade. On the 6th night, the red moon eclipsed the silver. The world was bathed in a dim glow, not darkness, but something deeper, a light that hid itself while remaining visible. In that half-world, the people saw their own shadows moving strangely, slower than their bodies, as if remembering another rhythm. They spoke softly of a realm beside this one, walking close but unseen. Somewhere in the desert, a woman, a keeper of lunar lore, stood before the mirror of the observatory and wept. She said she could hear the moons singing to each other. Not in words, but in tone. 2 low hums interwoven, one calling, one answering. She wrote of it in her scrolls. The heavens have remembered themselves. What was separated now speaks again. The next morning she was gone. Her room held only her instruments and a single silver disc marked with red dust. When dawn came on the 7th day, the red moon began to fade. It dimmed slowly, as if folding itself back into the shadow that had birthed it. The sky returned to its old rhythm, and the silver moon reclaimed its solitary throne. But the people of that land were never the same. In the decades that followed, temples were built in pairs, twin towers, twin altars, twin sanctuaries facing each other across courtyards of white stone. The walls bore carvings of two moons intertwined by a serpent of light. Each festival henceforth honored duality, day and night, birth and decay, silence and song, for they had seen with their own eyes that even the heavens could remember a lost companion. Modern astronomers, tracing the old myths, have noted records of unusual celestial phenomena: atmospheric veils, volcanic dust, ancient comets glowing red from the setting sun. Science offers its explanations gentle and logical, but the stories persist because they speak to something older than reason. The ache of separation, the yearning for what was once whole. The desert that held the kingdom still bears the marks of its devotion. Under satellite light, one can trace faint circles carved into the earth, immense lunar diagrams spanning miles, their geometry precise beyond comprehension. No one knows how they were cut or what they measured. Some align with the path of the moon across centuries, others with points now lost to the shifting sky. It is as though the builders were mapping a reunion that might come again. At night, when wind moves through those ruins, it hums softly across the old stone. A sound like two voices merging, distant yet familiar. The Bedouin who cross the region call it the morning of the second moon. They light no fires near the circles. Instead, they sit quietly and watch the horizon, waiting for the faintest blush of red to rise, even if only in memory. It is said that the second moon still exists, not gone, only forgotten, hidden beyond sight, circling in silence. On rare nights, when the air is thin and the stars burn clear, some swear they see it flicker. A faint glow beside the true moon, a breath of crimson between clouds. And for that brief moment, they say, the world feels balanced again. Two reflections, one heart. The priests of that vanished kingdom had a saying, preserved in fragments: he who prays to one moon seeks peace. He who prays to two seeks remembrance. Perhaps the second moon was never a body of stone and dust. Perhaps it was a mirror for the soul, a reflection of all we have lost and all we continue to long for. It came not to frighten, but to remind. Now, when poets speak of twin moons, they do so with reverence. They say that one moon watches the world, and the other watches the heart. When we dream, it is under the gaze of the second. When we wake, its light slips away, waiting for night to call it home again. At dawn, the desert returns to its pale silence. Sand stretches unbroken. The great mirror of the observatory lies buried beneath time, its circle filled with wind-blown dust. But beneath that dust, the stone still gleams faintly, polished by centuries of moonlight, waiting for its twin reflection to return. The story ends not with disappearance, but with patience. For even if the red moon never rises again, its memory lingers in us, in the soft pull of the tides, in the ache of every separation, in the quiet knowledge that somewhere, something lost is still circling back toward home. And perhaps one night when the world is ready to remember, the second moon will appear once more, not in the sky, but in the still water of our dreams, shining beside the first, two reflections reunited in silence. It begins with a sound, faint, melodic, rising through water like a forgotten hymn. Divers who descend off the Aegean coast speak of it softly, as though naming it too loudly might disturb its sleep. It comes not from whales, nor current, nor machine, but from the stones themselves. A tremor of tone, a chord that hums between silence and sorrow. The fishermen of nearby islands have long known this place. They call it Thalassonian, the drowned city. When the sea is calm and the moon leans low, one can see faint outlines beneath the water. Marble columns, stairways that lead nowhere, courtyards paved with what look like the backs of mirrors. Sometimes, when the light is just right, those stones gleam, and for a moment it seems the city is breathing. Long ago, before waves claimed it, This was said to be a city built not against the sea, but for it. His people believed the ocean was a living being, vast, holy, awake. They did not sail upon it. They conversed with it. Every dawn, they would gather along the shore to sing, not in chorus, but in resonance, each voice finding its note within the sea's eternal rhythm. Their songs were simple, tones of greeting, gratitude, and exchange. And when the wind stilled, the ocean would answer, soft surges of foam, rhythmic as breath, as though it were listening. Archaeologists who have studied the ruins found something curious. Every wall, every column, is grooved with subtle lines, as if meant to carry vibration. The city was not merely built of stone, but tuned like an instrument. When the waves moved through its streets, the whole city would sing. It is said that on calm nights, the resonance could be heard miles away, a low, shimmering hum rising from the shore, blending with the voice of the sea. To the people who lived there, it was not music. It was communion. They believed the sea remembered everything it touched, every prayer, every promise, every sound. And so they sang to remind it they had not forgotten. The oldest inscriptions, recovered from slabs of coral-encrusted marble, bear fragments of a single phrase repeated again and again. What we give returns. No temples remain intact, no statues upright, yet the pattern of streets suggests intention. All avenues curve inward toward a great open plaza that once faced the waves. At its center lies a circular basin, now filled with sand. Some think it was a stage for offerings, others a reservoir for rainwater. But the old stories say it was the mouth of the city, the point where human sound entered the sea. Each season, when the moon was fullest, the people held what they called the listening. Torches lined the shore. Children carried bowls of glowing shells to the water's edge. The priests would stand in the plaza and begin a single sustained tone, low, even drawn from the chest rather than the throat. Slowly, hundreds of voices joined, rising into layered harmony. The air itself seemed to ripple. And then, when all voices ceased at once, the ocean would respond, waves rising in perfect rhythm, as if the earth itself had inhaled. It is said that those nights were luminous beyond reason, the sea shimmering as though lit from within. Some claimed to see shapes beneath the water, moving in time with the song, silhouettes of beings neither fish nor human, gliding through the sound like dancers through smoke. Whether spirits, echoes, or illusions of moonlight, no one dared to question them. The city called them the rememberers, the sea's own memory, given form. But the harmony could not last. One generation forgot the patience of tone. Trade brought noise, haste, and gold. The songs shortened, replaced by command. The sea, once greeted as equal, became a servant, made to bear ships and ambitions. When the storms began, no one recognized them as reply. The first tide rose without warning, sweeping through the lower streets and leaving behind fish that gleamed like coins. The priests called it cleansing. The second tide broke the harbor walls. The third did not retreat. Those who tried to sing were drowned before the final note. Those who fled inland said the last sound they heard was not thunder but a vast hum, the city's final chord, still resonating as it sank. The sea accepted what was given, and what it gave it took back. Centuries passed. The ocean softened its anger into memory. Sand buried the streets, coral embraced the columns. And yet, even now, when storms subside and the moon breathes gently upon the surface, divers say they can still hear it, that low tone, rising from below, woven into the rhythm of the tide. Not mournful, not vengeful, simply alive. Marine archaeologists have tried to explain it. They say it is caused by the geometry of the ruins, water moving through hollow chambers, vibrating stone and shell. But when instruments are lowered to record it, the tone stops. It resumes only when the equipment is lifted away, as though the sea refuses to be measured. In one recovered tablet, half erased by salt, a line remains clear. Sing softly, the sea listens better than gods. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps divinity does not dwell above, but beneath, in the unbroken, unjudging patience of water. Those who have visited the site speak of a strange calm upon resurfacing. They describe the feeling of something vast and tender pressing against the mind, like a mother's hand over a child's eyes. Dreams that follow are filled with light and motion. Cities of liquid glass, stairways of foam, faces that smile but never speak. When they wake, their ears ring faintly, as though some small part of the song followed them home. Along the shores of the nearby islands, old women still hum to the tide as they lay out nets. The melody is simple, rising, falling, returning. They say it keeps the sea kind. When asked where the song came from, they answer only, "It came from before." At dusk, when the sky darkens to indigo and the horizon melts into silver, the ocean seems to inhale. The waves slow, the surface smooths like glass, and in that stillness, a faint vibration begins. Too low for hearing, felt only in the bones. It grows, then fades, like the memory of a heartbeat. Perhaps the sea remembers the city more clearly than we ever will. Perhaps, in its endless patience, it continues to replay that old song, waiting for a voice brave enough to answer. If one were to dive deep enough, beyond the reach of light, past the coral towers and sleeping amphory, one might find the plaza still intact, the basin empty, the stones smooth as mirrors. And if one were to listen, truly listen, there would be no words, only tone. A single perfect note vibrating in the dark. That note, they say, is not fading. It is waiting, for sound, like the sea, never dies, travels, bends, returns, carrying its memory from one age to the next. When storms rise and the waves crash against the rocks, the ocean's roar is not anger. It is rehearsal. It is the sea practicing the song of the city it loved and lost. At dawn, when the first light strikes the horizon and the world turns pale, the sound fades again. The surface brightens. The ruins lie silent beneath. But sometimes, when gulls cry and the air carries that thin, shimmering vibration, you can almost hear it, a whisper of harmony between water and wind. And if you close your eyes, it feels for a moment as though the whole sea is breathing, and the drowned city, still dreaming, sings softly back. In a desert where no maps remain true, where wind erases the shape of the world each night, there lies a plain strewn with faces. They are carved from stone, immense, weathered, and half-buried, their eyes blind with sand. Once, they stood upright upon altars of gold and fire. Now, they lie face down in the dust, like fallen suns, their names long dissolved into the air. The locals call this place the Valley of Sleepers. Travelers avoid it after dusk, for it is said that at night the statues sigh. The wind passes over their hollow mouths, and a tone rises, low, mournful, as though the gods are dreaming of what they once were. Archaeologists describe it as the remnants of an empire's faith, a civilization that worshipped a pantheon of light and storm, birth and decay. But no temple stands whole. No inscription bears the name of a god. Every stone that once declared divinity has been deliberately erased. It is as if the people themselves grew weary of their heaven. In the time before forgetting, these plains were sacred. Pilgrims crossed vast distances to stand beneath colossal statues, to offer bowls of oil and song. Each god was given a color: azure for the bringer of rivers, gold for the keeper of dawn, black for the watcher of night. At sunset, the valley must have glowed with every hue of devotion. And then, one day, the song stopped. No one knows why. Some say drought, some rebellion. But the oldest fragments hint at something else, a silence that fell not from absence, but from understanding. The priests wrote that their gods had grown tired, that they wished to sleep. And so, at the final festival, the people gathered beneath the statues and sang a single, unbroken note, a farewell. When the note ended, they turned away, leaving their deities to dream. A century passed. Sand buried the altars. Wind polished the faces smooth. And the gods slept on, unbothered by their own disappearance. It is said that when the moon is high and the air perfectly still, the desert glows faintly. A light with no source, soft as breath, moving slowly across the ground. Some believe it is the memory of the divine, the echo of worship itself, still circling the valley like incense. There is one statue still half upright, its head tilted toward the horizon. The features are gone, the stone cracked, but around its base are carvings unlike any other. Not words, spirals, lines, and what appear to be stars. A map, perhaps, or maybe a reminder that even gods are bound to constellations they did not create. A scholar once camped there to study the pattern. Each night, as he traced the symbols under lamplight, he heard a low hum drifting through the air. First, he thought it was wind, but when he stilled his breath, he realized it came from the stone itself. It vibrated, gently, like a voice trying to wake. He pressed his ear against it and heard something faint. Words, perhaps, or the memory of them. When he rose, the desert was utterly silent. He packed his things and left before dawn, saying only, "The gods still listen." Some legends say the statues were turned to stone not by time, but by mercy. That when humankind grew too loud, too proud, the gods gave up their forms and became earth, to feel the world without ruling it. Their fall was not punishment, but surrender, and in surrender they found peace. It is a strange comfort, this idea that even divinity longs for stillness, that perhaps the highest form of power is to become quiet. In the fading light, their shadows stretch long across the sand, reaching like dark rivers toward the horizon. Each shadow aligns perfectly with the next, as though they are still connected by some unseen thread. Perhaps they are not asleep at all, but waiting. Perhaps they speak through shadow now, through the cool silence that falls when day ends. At dusk, the wind carries a peculiar sound through the valley. Not quite music, not quite voice. It rises, wavers, and fades, always just beyond understanding. Those who have heard it say it feels like being remembered. Not by name, but by essence, the sense of being known without being seen. The Bedouin who pass through sometimes leave offerings. A handful of salt, a drop of oil, a feather. They say it keeps the desert calm. They do not pray to the statues. They simply acknowledge them, the way one acknowledges an old mountain or a sleeping ancestor. In their language, the place is called Sahat al-Ansar, the field of echoes. It is not a name of fear, but of reverence. For the desert, too, is a God vast, impartial, eternal. And perhaps all gods, when forgotten, return to it. When the stars rise, the valley changes. The faces of the statues, blank by day, glow faintly in the starlight. The sand becomes silver, and the air grows warm though the night is cold. Some travelers swear they have seen movement then. Not of the statues, but of light, flickering across their surfaces like thought. As if the gods, in their dreaming, still remember what it meant to be worshipped. One inscription, found broken and half-buried, bears a single surviving line. We gave them breath, and they gave us silence. Perhaps that was the covenant. Perhaps worship was never about obedience, but exchange. The eternal rhythm between voice and echo, creation and rest. In ancient texts from nearby cultures, there are tales of gods who withdrew willingly, leaving behind their images as guardians of quiet. They did not die, they transformed. Their thrones became hills, their crowns rivers, their hearts the slow pulse beneath the earth. If you listen closely, they said, you can still hear them breathing through the wind. And maybe that is all prayer ever was, the world listening to itself. When dawn comes, the valley appears lifeless again. The statues lie half-buried, faces turned toward nothing. But beneath the surface, grains of sand vibrate with the memory of that nocturnal hum. It is almost imperceptible, but it is there, the smallest tremor, as if something immense is breathing beneath the dust. Those who return to the valley often speak of a peculiar feeling afterward, an absence that does not hurt, but humbles, as though part of them had been seen, recognized, and then gently released. Perhaps that is the last gift of the forgotten gods, that even in silence, they bless through stillness. The scholar who once heard the hum wrote in his final notebook, "Their power is not gone, it has changed form, It no longer demands. It waits. And that is how the story ends. Not with a fall, but with a retreat into gentleness. The gods who once ruled from thunder and flame now dwell in stone and dust. Their shadows cross the desert like quiet rivers, feeding nothing, harming nothing. They have become patience itself. As the night deepens, the stars tilt westward, and the wind returns. It moves softly through the valley, stirring the sand over the sleeping faces. The hum rises once more, low, distant, endless. Could be the sound of the earth turning, or it could be the sigh of a god, still dreaming. Perhaps both. And as the listener drifts towards sleep, they realize the truth the ancients must have known. Even the divine grows weary of worship. Even eternity needs rest. And sometimes to be forgotten is to finally be free. It begins with a circle of candlelight and a sheet of parchment the color of old bone. The room is small, its walls thick with centuries. A single slit window admits the moon as a thin blade of silver, falling across a wooden table worn smooth by prayer and ink. On that table, beneath the breath of the candles, lies a map. It does not glitter with compass roses or parade its places with proud names. It seems almost blank, a pale veil marked by faint strokes the color of cooled obsidian. It draws the eye not to coastlines, but to absences. Not to cities, but to hush. It is said the map was found in a monastery facing the desert, sealed inside a tube of cedar and salt. The seal had not been broken in living memory. When the monks opened it, a scent rose like rain on stone. They unrolled the parchment slowly, and in that first moment, the room changed, as if the air itself leaned closer to listen. The candles trembled as though a door had shifted somewhere beneath the floor. Whispers tell us that the cartographer who made it never drew rivers, only their dry beds. He marked not roads, but the spaces between them. He left mountains as breaths, cities as silences, borders as threads that could be pulled away without a tear. Some argued it was not a map at all, but a meditation. A soft instruction to remember what the world forgets. The places that swallow sound, the corridors where light hesitates, the gates that open onto nothing and yet feel like returning. In the upper corner, where other maps might place a title, there is only a symbol. A thin black spiral, coiling inward until it disappears. Beneath it, in letters so small they seem woven into the skin of the page, a single sentence. Where memory fades, the path begins. Those who first studied the parchment did so as one approaches a reliquary. They touched it with linen-wrapped fingers, breathed shallowly, and read it aloud in murmurs, the way one reads a prayer without fully understanding its words. The ink, ground from obsidian dust and mixed with wind-fallen resin, glimmered when the candle wavered, then returned to stillness. Lines appeared and withdrew like fish beneath clear water. At times the map seemed to draw itself darker. At times it paled until only the spiral remained, a moonless eye. It led, so the margin notes suggest, to regions where maps were said to end. Not at the world's edge, that old storied cliff where ocean fell into night, but at older borders, quiet and interior. The thresholds where names loosen, where landmarks unlearn their shapes, where the pilgrim discovers that direction is a question the earth asks back. The first mark was a small gate sketched at the parchment's left, a pair of uprights with a lintel, nothing more. Beyond it, the line did not rush or boast. It wandered, as though listening for where the ground wished to be traced. There were no measurements. No legend guided the eye. The scale was a feeling. The distance, a breath. One followed not to arrive, but to be carried. The journey began in the recognizable world. A hill with wind, a river that spoke quietly to stones, and then, with a soft turn, entered terrain that cartography cannot bear. A valley that refused its own echo, a plain where shadows lay without owners, a city drawn only by the places where its walls were not. Some believe the map was made for a king, to find an enemy whose kingdom had removed itself from light. Others say it was drawn for a monastery, a chart to guide souls through the long night of prayer. A few, the gentlest of scholars, say the cartographer drew it for himself, because he had learned that all roads lead outward until they do not. That to go farther, one must walk into forgetting. There is a story folded into the map's legend, preserved in ink as fine as dust. It tells of a man who studied the sky until the sky began to study him back. He learned the years by the tilt of constellations, and the hours by the way night cooled the breath. He charted stars until names failed and only positions remained. Then, in old age, he turned his attention to the earth beneath his feet and discovered it, too, was made of constellations. Wells aligned with stones, old paths answering the angles of dawn, ruins listening to winter. He decided to draw the ground as the heavens hid it, as pattern, as music, as absence. Thus the map began. The first travelers who followed it walked by night. The parchment spoke more clearly under the moon. By day, the lines dulled to simple stains. By night, they stirred like thin smoke. The pilgrims set out with little. A lamp, a bell, water, patience. They passed the known shrines and the ordinary crossroads and kept to the shaded seams where the land seems to rest between choices. When they reached the gate drawn at the map's edge, they found it waiting in stone. 2 pillars uncarved, a lintel laid across with the casual certainty of old builders. The desert beyond lay unmarked, and yet, those who crossed felt it. A change in the air, a hush within the hush, as though one step had returned them to a rhythm that had always been there. Beyond the gate, the map became more spare. Landmarks thinned like stars before dawn. Instead of inked mountains, there were only pauses, spaces where the pen had hovered. Instead of rivers, the faintest sweep of a line, as if the cartographer had exhaled and allowed the breath to settle as direction. The pilgrims followed these silences as if they were paths. At the places where the map grew most empty, the world around them grew most attentive. Their thoughts slowed, their speech lowered. The bells they carried made small sounds that wandered ahead and did not return. It is said they reached, after long walking, a hollow ringed with low stones. The map marked it with a bare circle, no name, no script. In the circle's center, the ground shone faintly as if polished by the turning of centuries. The travelers stood within and found that the air trembled. Not violently, only enough to remind them they were made of cords. They stood still until the trembling matched the heart. When they stepped out again, the road within them had changed. It no longer unrolled, it opened. From there, the way led downward, not into caverns, but into quiet. Villages along the route greeted the pilgrims with untroubled faces, as if they recognized an old custom. In the evenings, elders brought out bowls of water and set them in doorways to cool the night. No one asked where the travelers were going. The question seemed too loud for the dark. At the map's center, if such a chart can be said to have a center, there is a region drawn as a veil, a wash of diluted ink that thins toward the edges until it becomes air. In it float small marks like islands. Some are circles, others are squares. One resembles an ear. The cartographer labeled none of them. In the lower margin, however, a note. Here the ground listens. Walk softly. Those who claim to have reached that place report peculiar weather. The wind arranges itself. Sand works like water. Sound enters the body and finds purchase. The whispers of companions do not travel sideways but inward, arriving among the ribs as warmth. It is impossible to hurry there. Steps take themselves, as if the dust has a pace it prefers and will not be refused. One pilgrim, writing on a scrap pinned to the map's protective cloth, described an encounter in the vale. We came to stones set like teeth. Between them, a passage. Within it, shadow gathered, not dark but rich, a cloth of dusk. We entered. No echo followed us. Our names did not answer when called. Only breath. Only the low tone the earth keeps when it is praying for rain. What lay beyond? The margin asks in another hand, later eager. Beyond lay the same world. The pilgrim replies, but softer, as if every object had been wrapped for the journey. We understood that we had not arrived in another place, only in another way of being in this one. Not all who followed the map returned. The parchment does not mourn them. It does not warn. It is not a guardian and it is not a test. It is a reflection. It shows what the traveler brings. Those who came hungry for conquest found the lines faint as smoke and blamed the candle. Those who came with empty hands found the spiral opening like a flower. Scholars, gentle even when skeptical, have tried to measure its strangeness. They placed it over known maps and discovered coincidences. The veil aligns with old monastic paths, with Roman roads that now sleep beneath fields, with the ghost routes of caravans whose bells no longer ring. It aligns, too, with invisible things, with places where birds circle and do not land, with wells that taste of iron and rain at once, with droughts that end in the hour before dawn. Perhaps the cartographer did not draw from the world but from its memory, from the way the land has learned to carry footsteps without harm. It is possible that the map does not lead out at all. It might be a guide inward, to the chamber where the mind keeps its first silence. There is a page sewn into its backing, discovered only when the cloth was mended. A small diagram of a human figure, seated, drawn without face. Lines radiate from the chest. Around the figure, a circle. Around the circle, a square. Around the square, nothing. Beneath, 3 words, faded, gate within gate. The last portion of the chart, rolled deepest and most delicate, shows only dark. The ink there has been layered until it drinks the candlelight. No lines, no marks. Only the rich blackness of a moonless wall. In the lower right, the cartographer's hand appears once more, steady as breath. Here the path continues beyond sight. The monks who keep the map do not display it often. When they do, they read a short invocation before unrolling the final panel. For those who ask to see, let seeing become listening. For those who ask to go, let going become remaining. Afterward they sit in simple chairs and say nothing for a long time, until the candles exhaust themselves and the room grows dark. In that dark, the last panel seems to change, or perhaps the eyes do. The black is no longer absence but depth. One senses that if the hand were laid upon it, the skin would meet not paper but a cool corridor, a drift, a gentle pull towards sleep. From time to time, someone brings the monks a map to compare. A merchant's chart of ports, a king's survey of taxes, a pilgrim's sketch of shrines, and asks whether the lines match. The brothers are kind. They say all maps match if one looks softly. Then they show the visitor a blank sheet, clean as morning, and ask what they see. Those who answer with a place are sent to rest. Those who answer with a pause are given a candle. Night after night, the map remains. It does not age in the way that other paper ages. It breathes with the room, curls slightly when the air grows damp, relaxes when the wind comes warm off the desert. Sometimes the spiral in the corner seems larger. Sometimes it looks like an ear willing to forgive. The candles gutter, the moon moves, the hour loosens, and the map lies quietly, offering its shadow without conclusion. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to find us. Those moments in a life when the familiar routes fail and the heart seeks a gentler compass. Then, like a hand in the dark, it arrives. A soft chart of unnameable places, a path drawn through hush, a promise that there is a way forward even when forward is a form of returning. By dawn, the candles have hissed themselves to smoke. The room gathers its gray. The map, rolled once more, returns to its cedar tube with a sigh of parchment on wood. Outside, the first birds test the light. The monks open the door, and cool air enters like water into a thirst. The world is again a city of streets and names. Yet something in it has shifted. A small chamber of quiet has been added to the day. And if, somewhere on that day, the walker stumbles upon a threshold that looks like nothing, an alley that grows softer as it narrows, a field that hums at its edges, a stair that leads neither up nor down but away, perhaps they will remember the spiral. Perhaps they will pause. Perhaps the map will unfurl within the chest like a slow exhale, and the way will appear without being drawn. Not toward a destination, but toward a patience. Not into brightness, but into depth. Not to an answer, but to a listening that feels like home. Some voices only echo when we are ready. Some paths lead into shadow not to hide us, but to teach us how to see. And when night comes again, and the candles return to their watch, the map will wait. A hush on bone, a breath on glass, a gate within gate, enduring not as direction, but as a memory of how to walk when the world grows sacred and still. There is a forest in northern Japan where the mist lingers even at noon. The trees there do not sway, they listen. Their trunks are black with moss, their roots folded into the bones of old stone roads that lead nowhere. Hidden beneath their shade lies a city the maps forgot. A city that once slept beneath bell towers. No one remembers its true name. Locals call it Namurinomaki, the sleeping city. They say its people disappeared without violence, without fire, without trace. One morning, the bells simply rang by themselves, long, low, and mournful. And when the sound faded, the streets were empty. Only the towers remain, tall and narrow, their bells hanging like hollow moons. The air within them is heavy and patient, as though waiting for breath. At night, when fog rolls down from the mountains, the sound returns. Faint, melodic, impossible to locate. It drifts between the trees, neither near nor far, like a dream deciding whether to stay. The first travelers who came upon the ruins wrote that it felt like walking through a dream that remembered you. No animals stirred, no birds called. Even footsteps seemed swallowed before they landed. And then a bell. Not loud but pure. The tone hung in the air long after the ear should have forgotten it. No one could find which tower it came from. All the bells were still. Yet the sound continued, threading softly through the mist, as if the city itself was breathing through bronze. Archaeologists have studied the ruins for decades. They found that each tower is built from an alloy of copper and iron unknown to the region. Metal that does not rust, metal that hums faintly when touched. The bells are flawless, without seams, as though cast in a single breath. No inscriptions mark them. No signature claims their making. Only one symbol repeats upon each bell. A single circle within another, like two eyes closed in sleep. Legend says the city was built as a sanctuary of listening. Its founders believed that sound was a bridge between the living and the unseen, that each tone, if sustained in purity, could call the forgotten back to peace. They crafted bells not for alarm or worship, but for rest. Each tower was tuned to a different note, and together they formed what the elders called the chord of dawn. A harmony so gentle that the wind itself softened when it passed through. At the hour before sunrise, the bells would ring not by human hands, but by air. Small windows in the towers caught the night's final breath and set the bronze to trembling. The sound would travel across the valley, stirring petals, water, dreams. People said it calmed the dead. They said even the stars lingered longer in the sky to listen. It must have been a world of extraordinary quiet. A city that greeted morning not with clamor, but with tone. Children grew up measuring time by sound instead of shadow. Merchants opened their stalls when the fourth bell faded. The sick were lulled to sleep by the gentlest vibrations. The elders ended their lives surrounded by resonance rather than prayer. No one knows when the last bell rang. Some stories say the people grew so still, so attuned to silence, that one day they simply continued listening and never returned. Others speak of a winter when the air grew too cold to carry sound, and in that void, the city dissolved. Whatever the truth, the bells remain. When storms move through the valley, the air trembles. Sometimes the bells answer with a note that lingers for minutes after thunder dies. It is as though the wind remembers the pattern, trying to recall the melody of its own breath. In the archives of Kyoto, there is a single parchment attributed to a monk who claimed to have found the city centuries ago. He wrote, "I entered a place where every sound became mercy. The bells did not ring for prayer, but for remembering. Each tone named someone who once was. I could not count the names. I could only weep." His script trails off into a curve, as if he too had fallen asleep before finishing. Some of the towers have since sunk into the earth. Moss covers their mouths. But when the fog is thickest, the bells beneath still sing faintly, muffled but clear, the resonance of dreams beneath soil. Villagers who live near the forest say the sound is strongest on nights of grief. When a person dies, the bells ring by themselves, carrying the name through mist and distance until it joins the chorus of the unseen. Scientists call it coincidence. They speak of wind pressure, of sympathetic vibration. But there is always a moment, just before explanation, when even their voices lower, as if afraid to disturb something old and tender still breathing in the ruins. Once, a group of sound engineers brought instruments to record the tones. They stayed for 2 nights, surrounded by static and fog. When they played back the recordings, there were no notes, only silence, layered upon silence, so dense it pulsed. Yet when they played the tape in another room, the air began to vibrate faintly, forming a pitch too low to be heard by ear but felt in the ribs. They called it residual frequency. The villagers called it the soul of sound. A philosopher who wrote about the city said that it was not destroyed. It transcended. He believed the inhabitants found a way to live inside tone itself, to move beyond words into pure vibration, where no loss could follow. The bells, he wrote, were their doorway, left behind as an invitation to anyone willing to listen without asking. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps each ring that drifts through the forest is not echo, but presence. The city itself, breathing softly in another octave of existence. At dawn, when the fog begins to lift, the valley gleams like glass. The towers fade into shape one by one, their bells still, their mouths open like eyes about to wake. The last of the night wind moves through, and for a moment, every bell hums together. Not loud, not long, but enough to make the heart pause. The sound rises, spreads, and then stops. The air remains trembling long after, as though the sound refused to end completely. Those who hear it often describe a single feeling afterward, the sense that something inside them has been gently aligned, that a hidden chord, long forgotten, has been tuned again. In nearby temples, monks still honor the city in their morning meditations. Before dawn, they sit in stillness and wait for the faintest hum. When they hear it, they bow not to a god, but to silence made sacred through sound. They call it the breath of those who listen. It is said that on some nights, when the world grows quiet enough, when snow muffles even thought, one can hear the bells far beyond the forest, faint but pure. They drift through the sleeping towns, through open windows and unfinished dreams. And when they pass, the air feels lighter, as if carrying something away. Sorrow, perhaps, or time. By morning, the world forgets again. The bells fall silent. The forest swallows the ruins. The mist folds back into the trees. But the echo remains somewhere in the body, soft as the pulse behind the ribs. A reminder that stillness is not the absence of life, but its gentlest form. And perhaps that is the lesson of the sleeping city, that every sound longs eventually for silence, and every silence hides a sound waiting to be heard again. When the final fog clears and the sun lays its first gold upon the towers, the forest stands utterly still. A single bell gleams, catching the light like a drop of dawn. It does not ring. It does not need to. The sound lives everywhere now, in wind, in water, in the breath that leaves and returns without name. And as the world wakes, the sleeping city dreams on, not lost, not gone, but folded within the hush between moments, where even silence has a voice. In the heart of the Persian desert, where salt gleams like glass and wind moves without sound, there lies a tomb no one meant to find. It is half buried beneath dunes of pale dust that shift like smoke. Seen from above, its roof glints faintly blue, a strange hue against the copper horizon. It is not stone. It is glass, a dome of translucent mineral that catches the sun by day and the stars by night, so that even in ruin, the tomb appears alive. The people who live on the desert's edge call it Gori Nafas, the tomb of breath. They say it belongs to a king who sought to conquer death not by force, but by stillness. He was the last of his line, a ruler who grew weary of conquest and ceremony, who one day declared that he would give the throne back to the wind. He ordered his crown melted into a mirror, his throne broken into 7 equal stones, and his name erased from every inscription. Then he built this tomb not for the dead, but for the act of ceasing to breathe. According to the old stories, the king gathered his builders and said, "Make for me a chamber that remembers the moment before breath. Not the silence of death, but the silence that waits for life to begin." They carved a hall beneath the desert floor, so smooth that even footsteps could not echo. Its walls were lined with blue glass from distant mountains, polished until they caught the faintest light and turned it into water. At the center, they raised a sarcophagus of white salt, a substance that remembers touch. Around it, they carved symbols of lungs, stars, and wind, the signs of what cannot be held. When the tomb was finished, the king entered alone. He carried no servants, no treasure, no prayer. He sat upon the salt, placed his hands over his heart, and inhaled once. Then he exhaled, and did not draw breath again. Outside, the desert wind stilled for 3 days. The sun dimmed, and when it returned, the glass of the dome had turned a color no one had seen before. Neither sky nor sea, but something between, the shade of held breath. The builders sealed the entrance, as commanded, and left the tomb to the sand. Years passed, then centuries. Empires rose and fell. The glass survived every storm. Even now, when lightning strikes the plain, its light runs through the dome like a slow heartbeat before fading into silence. Travelers who cross the region at night sometimes see it glowing faintly, a sphere of blue fire resting on the horizon. Those who draw near describe a strange calm that descends upon them, as though the very air has forgotten how to move. They find no doorway, no inscription, only a single narrow slit at the dome's base, through which the wind sighs. It makes no whistle, no moan, just a continuous, measured exhale. The locals say it is the king himself, still releasing the same breath he took that night. Inside, the temperature never changes. There are no insects, no dust, only stillness, so perfect that even the pulse in one's ears begins to feel intrusive. Those who have entered through the narrow slit say that light behaves strangely there. It moves slowly, like oil poured through water, bending around the walls before settling on the sarcophagus at the center. There is nothing within it, only a thin layer of salt dust, glimmering as though it remembers the weight of something sacred. On the dome above, faint etchings shimmer when light passes across them. They are not writing, not art, but rhythm, waves of parallel lines that mirror the motion of breath. Inhale, exhale, pause. The pattern repeats, then fades, as if the tomb itself were breathing along with the visitor. Historians have argued endlessly about the tomb's origin. Some attribute it to the late Achaemenids, others to a forgotten dynasty of mystics. No records name a breathless king, yet the myths persist, and the air within that chamber is unlike air anywhere else. It feels both ancient and newborn, heavy and light, as if it has never been used before. One explorer who entered the tomb in the early 20th century wrote in his journal, "I heard nothing, not even my own heart. My lungs forgot their purpose. For one terrible, holy moment, I understood him." He left the desert a week later and never spoke again. His companions said he smiled often, but with the softness of one who has already said farewell to noise. Mystics have long claimed that breath is the bridge between the mortal and divine, that each inhalation is an arrival, each exhalation a surrender. To cease that rhythm willingly is to step beyond duality, to become still enough for the world to rest upon you without weight. Perhaps the king understood this. Perhaps he sought not immortality, but completion. When night falls over the desert, the dome catches the starlight and scatters it across the plain. From afar, it looks like a lake. Camels refuse to pass near it. Their handlers say the ground hums beneath their feet, a low, continuous vibration, like the earth whispering a single held note. It is not frightening. It is solemn. It is the sound of everything remembering how to be quiet. There are those who believe the tomb is not a monument to death at all, but to transformation. That the king did not die, he dissolved. His breath became wind. His silence became sky. His body became the stillness that sits behind every living thing. A Sufi poet once wrote of him, "He laid aside the noise of kingship, and the world leaned close to hear what silence sounds like." Even now, the villagers who cross that desert at dusk recite his name softly, not as a prayer, but as a pause between words. They leave small offerings at the edge of the dunes. Feathers, glass beads, polished stones that whisper when the wind touches them. They believe that if one stands long enough beside the tomb and breathes in rhythm with the sighing wind, sorrow loosens, and the body remembers what peace feels like. Inside, there are no shadows. The light bends too evenly for them to exist. Each visitor who enters becomes part of that glow. Their outline dissolves, their edges blur, until all that remains is a faint shimmer in the air. The breath that leaves the body joins the same slow exhale that has continued for centuries, unbroken. It is said that the king listens to it still, that his soul has become the very sound of rest. At dawn, the desert brightens to white. The dome fades back into invisibility. From above, it seems to vanish completely, as though the earth has closed its mouth. But beneath the surface, the chamber remains, its glass walls cool, its air eternal. It does not ask to be remembered. It does not ask to be found. It only keeps breathing, the soft, endless rhythm that holds the world together between its pauses. Perhaps that is why the winds around it never stop. Perhaps every current, every sigh across the dunes, is a fragment of that same first exhale, the king's final gift to the living. For what is breath, if not the world moving through us for a time? What is stillness, if not the echo of everything waiting to begin again? As the last light of evening folds over the desert and the dome glows one more time, the air grows perfectly quiet. It is not death that lingers here, but peace, vast and tender, older than sound. A silence so complete that it feels like love. And somewhere within it, the king exhales still, a sigh long enough to hold eternity. And now the night grows still again. The whispers of ancient cities fade into the hum of the earth, and the forgotten names return to silence. The obelisks, the rivers, the masks, the bells, all have spoken in their own quiet way, reminding us that history is not gone. It only sleeps. Perhaps every ruin is a dream still unfolding, every echo a memory waiting for someone to listen. And as the stars turn slowly above, the stories we have wandered through settle back into dust and moonlight, unchanged, eternal, patient. The world is quiet now, and in that quiet, something sacred breathes, a sound too soft to name, a peace too vast to hold. So rest, traveler. Let the stories fade like footprints beneath the tide. Let the night carry you the rest of the way. The past is not lost. It is only waiting, in silence, for your next dream.